Hi, everyone, and welcome to Faith Now on Faith Social. Today, we are excited for our first segment with our new series called Atypical Outreach, where we're having conversations with ministry and lay leaders who work with specific demographics of believers who often struggle to fit in the traditional church model. My name is Madeline with the Faith Social team, and today I'm excited to welcome our first guest, recently retired minister of Triune Mercy Center in Greenville, South Carolina, and author of The Weight of Mercy, Reverend Deb Richardson-Moore. Reverend Deb, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you, Madeline.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. Tell us a little bit about your story and your ministry and how you got to Triune and what makes Triune special.
Okay, well, I was sort of a non-traditional pastor because I was a news reporter for the first 27 years of my career, and I was assigned to the religion beat. So I was going to go back to school to learn more about my beat, and I thought I was going to go study Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism and things like that, but the colleges around me, Furman and Clemson, did not have a master's degree in that. So I ended up quite by accident in a seminary, Erskine Theological Seminary down in Due West, South Carolina. And my first class there was an intro to the New Testament. And I was just mesmerized because to my eye, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were news reporters. And they were reporting this vibrant, new, radical story about the risen Jesus. So I could see how each one of them had different perspectives on him based on who they were, which had always been my experience as a reporter, that every one of our stories reflected to some extent who we were, who the reporter was. So anyway, I went down, got my Master of Divinity degree, and came to Triune Mercy Center, which was a dissolved United Methodist Church that had become this mission church of outreach to homeless people who lived in what police called the homeless triangle of Greenville, South Carolina. So we were sort of sitting in the midst of this dilapidated mill community that had dissolved and run to prostitution and drugs and selling blood plasma and day labor pools, all the things that you find in a high poverty situation. Well, I came into that church, and if I'd known what I was getting into, I probably would not have come. I don't think I would have been brave enough. We had there were drug deals being done in the church. The staff I inherited were selling drugs to the congregation. It was found liquor bottles in the bathrooms. I don't want to gross your listeners out, but people openly defecated in the breezeway. And it was just pretty bad. And my prayer in those days was, God, I'll stay here 1 year, but this is too much. You can't ask anybody to stay here more than a year. I got shoved, I got spit on, cursed out. So I sort of started just trying things. I felt like, well, there's nothing I can do that's going to hurt this place. And I got to tell you, there's great freedom in that when you have nowhere to go but up. And so I had to clear out the staff and hire new colleagues. And what my first inclination was, it had been a relief operation, giving out food and clothes and kerosene and just anything, blankets, anything you can imagine. And I looked around and I said, well, almost everybody in here the problem seems to me to be drugs and alcohol and mental illness. Why are we treating that with relief items? And so the people I began hiring were the people to address that. Can we get people into drug treatment? And then can we get people into mental health treatment? And then quite by accident, we began, just by necessity, we began inviting the people who were coming in to help us do that. You know, hey, can you help serve this meal? Can you help mop the floor afterwards? Can you help us paint this room? And seeing the sense of accomplishment and partnership that grew out of that sort of helped us then develop what that church would become. That we were all going to be in this together, housed and homeless, black and white and brown, rich and poor, mentally healthy, mentally ill, mentally disabled. We were all going to be working together, and we were going to be volunteering together and serving each other, just as a more resource source church got to do.
Okay, so let's look a little bit more just about homeless population in the church anyways. What do you think, why do you think that the homeless population is not understood and often isn't welcomed in our traditional church model?
Primarily, I think it comes from fear on both sides. More traditional churches are afraid of what's going to happen if they invite homeless people into their worship. They're probably afraid of bad smells. They're afraid of being stolen from. They're afraid that people already there will leave their church if they have to sit next to these people. And so we had a lot of churches over the years come to visit us and ask how to do what we had done. And I said, I'm going to be honest with you. If you already have a traditional model set up, it's going to be very hard to bring homeless people into that. Because not only are your parishioners likely to balk, but the homeless people are not going to feel welcome to walk in to begin with if what they are faced with is a lily white staid congregation. So what we had the advantage of was we started out, it would almost dissolve. And so the homeless people were the first people. We had about 6 or 8 remnants who were elderly and there, but for the most part, the homeless people started out being the first people there. And so we had about 30 or 40 homeless people worshiping with us before then more people started coming. And I'm telling you, when the doctors and the lawyers and the professors first started coming in, I almost said, what are you doing here? Because it was so odd to me. But every one of them said, I think this is what the kingdom of God looks like.
Those are some very good points about, having to decide as a church, what is your goal and what are you trying to do? So kind of piggybacking off of that, what is it that our churches maybe don't understand about the homeless population? Now I understand you worked with it in Greenville, South Carolina, so there's a lot of other homeless people in lots of other places, but what do you feel like the church really didn't understand?
I know people are well-meaning when they say that and when they want to do that, but it accomplishes so little. And a better path in my mind is to go more deeply with a few people to understand and get at what is really going on and help them solve those problems in their own time. That's a big thing too. We cannot solve those issues. As much as I wanted to, as much as I tried to, I learned I'm not going to solve in one afternoon what it took you 30 years, a hole that it took you 30 years to dig. Not going to happen. And it would probably wouldn't do any good if I solved it anyway. If I got a house for them, because they would lose it. There's so much work that has to be done. And so that's what I guess I would want a church to understand, that it is long, messy, involved, frustrating work.
What are some good ways that churches can just dip their toes in to get started or start making a plan for a long term?
Well, what I always recommend, and I don't know that not many people have taken me up on it, but is hire a social worker, a professional social worker. Because I got to tell you, I tried sort of to be the social worker for those first few years, and I think that was a lot of the problem. I didn't know how to be a social worker because that's not my training. I don't have the patience for it. But we hired social workers with an understanding of trauma, and which is huge, and an understanding of mental health, which is huge. And so they understood what they were looking at. And they understood that nothing is going to happen until the person wants it to happen and makes the steps to do it. And it might take years. There's one man who our social workers got into housing about 5 years ago, but he had been on the streets of Greenville for 37 years. I would have told you that wasn't possible, but he was. And now, so obviously he wasn't dealing with us for 37 years, but he had dealt with my social workers 6 or 7 or 8 years before he went in, and that is not uncommon. And so what I think what you want to do is create a forum where you can simply live life together. Some of the people are going to take your opportunities and run with them, and they're going to get into housing and they're going to get jobs, and you may or may not ever see them again. It may not be safe for them to come back and keep living with you, but some of them may never get any better, especially if there's mental disability involved and they're doing the best they can, but, or they may never get out of an addiction. But it's like, you know what? You're still a part of us. Come on to church. Come on and help us serve communion. You're still a member of this worshiping community, even if you can't get better by the world's standards.
Also beautiful. Okay, so I think one last thing is what parting words would you have for this? We're talking about churches getting involved with this ministry, or what the reality of it is. Are there any parting words, any last things you would want to say?
Sure. Homeless, we misuse that word a lot, and I'm the worst of the worst. Is we use homeless as a noun, when in fact, the homeless, and when in fact it should be an adjective. This is a homeless individual, because many, 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 many people have experienced homelessness at some point in their lives. Very few of us are homeless for our entire lives. And so it is a fluid situation. It is an improvable situation. And it is a situation that takes all of us. The government and churches, I believe, really have an important part in it. Just well-meaning citizens to help people who are currently homeless not to be anymore. And it's some of that is just going to require building more low income housing, because a lot of our communities are simply outpricing themselves. There are people who could very well maintain housing, but they can't maintain it at $1,000 a month. And so it's a very widespread, wide tentacled issue that a lot of us need to be looking at.
That's great. Well, last thing, what are some resources if people are trying to learn about homelessness, if they want to start something in their church? What are some resources that you would direct them to?
Well, they could always go to Triune. We had there was a church that closed down in Anderson, South Carolina, which is a community about 30 miles south of Greenville. And they came to us and sent over a pastor who spent a month with us, and then they sent over various church people for a year. And they just looked at it, and then they went back to Anderson and created South Main Mercy Center. So it's a model that can work anywhere. And you may want to talk to people who are already doing it, and they can steer you away from some of the pitfalls. And but yeah, I just think that, and so then resources, just, if you go online, there are hundreds probably of people doing the work. It's like I say, especially Salvation Armies, mission shelters, and every community is going to be different. It just so happens Greenville is almost entirely faith-based. That's been working on it all these years. But other communities may have a city shelter and all that. But just go online and find people that you think are doing good work, and then go and pick their brains.
That's great. Well, Deb, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I know you also have a new book coming out. Do you want to tell us about that really quickly?
Uh, well, I wrote after The Weight of Mercy. I wrote 3 murder mysteries that teach about homelessness. The cover story. No, I'm sorry, The Cantaloupe Thief, The Cover Story, and Death of a Jester. And they have a homeless person who is helps solve the murders because and so it really shows. And everybody says, "Oh, that's my favorite character," and it shows a homeless encampment in the background. This latest is Murder Forgotten, and it's completely a departure. It's set down at the beach, and it's a mystery writer who's losing her memory.
Oh, well, that'll also be linked in our comments, everyone, so you can see that. And we'll link Deb's website so you can check out all of her books, especially The Weight of Mercy, which is about her experience at Triune Mercy Center. Deb, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Madeline.